This is Terrence Andre Banks with Information Age Financial Solutions, coming to you with an article I read from Time. It's really disturbing about the state of small American farmers and the debt crisis and extinction. And when you're dealing with your food, is one of the most important things that we do for existence here. It comes down to all this financialization we own. Food, clothing, and shelter make up the hierarchy that pays the most attention. And when things start being affected by farmers, especially with the weather conditions, and then this from reading this article here, really need to be concerned and really need to take things differently and keep your mind open to see what's actually going on in this time and why things are so different than ever any time before. They're trying to wipe us off the map. Small American farmers are nearly extinction. As always, titles grab my attention when I put a link inside the description. For nearly 2 centuries, and they're doing an example here, it looks like they're starting off, the Riekman family has raised cows for milk in this muddy patch of land in the middle of Wisconsin. Mary and John Riekman, who now run the farm, and his 45 cows have seen all manners of ups and downs, droughts, floods, oversupplies of milk that sent prices tumbling, but they never seen a crisis quite like this one. And this is why it becomes so important that we pay attention to stuff like this. The Riekmans are about $300,000 in debt, and bill collectors are howling about the feed bill and replacement for a used tractor they bought to keep the farm going. But it's harder than ever to make any money, much less pay the debt, Mary Riekman says, the yellow wallpaper kitchen in the sagging farmhouse where she lives with her husband, John, and 2 of their 7 children. The Riekmans receive about $16 for every 100 pounds of milk they sell, a 40% decrease from 6 years back. There are weeks when the entire milk check goes towards $2,100 monthly mortgage payment. 2 bill collectors have taken out liens against the farm. What do you want when you're against the wall and you don't just know which way to turn? Riekman says as her ancient fridge begins to hum. Mary, 79, and John, 80, had hoped to leave the farm to their 2 sons, age 55 and 50, who still live with them and run the farm. Now they're less focused on their legacy than about making it through the week. In American imagination, at least, the family's farm still exists, as it does on holiday greeting cards, as a picturesque, moderately prosperous expanse that homely fills a space between the urban centers where most of us live. But it has been declining for generations, and the closing days of 2019 find the small farmers pummeled from every side. A trade war, severe weather associated with climate change, tanking commodity prices related to globalization, political polarization, and corporate farming defined not by a silo in a red barn, but technology and efficiencies of scale. It's the worst crisis in decades. Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies were up 12% in the Midwest from July 2018 to June of 2019. They're up 50% in the Northwest. Tens of thousands have simply stopped farming. Tens of thousands. Knowing that the reorganizations through bankruptcy won't save them. The nation lost more than 100,000 farmers between 2011 and 2018. 12,000 of those between 2017 and 2018 alone. Really disturbing. Farm debt at $416 billion is at an all-time high. More than half of all farmers have lost money every year since 2013 and lost more than 1,644 this year. Farm loan delinquencies are rising. Suicides in farm communities are happening with alarming frequency. Farmers aren't the only workers in the American economy being displaced by technology. You see, this is a fascinating, it's every facet because the technology is changing the landscape. And it's just such a different time that we live in, and none of the things that really were applicable in the past have no bearing right now. But when they lose their jobs, they also ejected from their homes and the land that's been in their family for generations. It hits you so hard when you feel like you're the one who's losing the legacy that your great-grandparents started, said Randy Roker, a Wisconsin dairy farmer who has struggled with depression and whose neighbor Leon Stantz committed suicide last year after financial struggles forced him to sell 50 dairy cows. Roker estimates he's losing $30,000 a month. Even large companies are facing unprecedented challenges. Dean Foods, a global dairy producer that buys milk from thousands of small farmers, filed for bankruptcy Tuesday, November 12, and is seeking a sale, a move that could further hamper farmers looking for places to sell the milk. Farmers have always talked of looming disaster, but the duration and severity of the current crisis suggests an alarming and once unthinkable possibility that independent farming is no longer a viable livelihood. Small farms defined as those bringing in less than $350,000 a year before expenses accounted for just a quarter of production in 2017, down from nearly half in 1991. In the dairy industry, small farmers accounted for just 10% of production. The disappearance of the small farmer will further hasten the decline of rural America, which has been struggling to maintain an economic base for decades. Farm and ranch families are facing a great extinction, says Al Davis, a Nebraska cattle producer and former state senator. If we lose that rural lifestyle, we really have a big part of what made this country great. There's a view from here. A perfect storm of factors has led to the recent crisis in the farm industry after boom years in the beginning of the 21st century for commodities like corn, soybeans, milk, and meat started falling in 2013. The reason for those lower prices are twin forces upending much of the American economy: technology and globalization. Technology has made farms more efficient than ever before, but economies of scale meant that most of the benefits accrued to corporate farmers who built up huge holdings as small farmers sold out. Even as 4 million farms disappeared in the United States between 1948 and 2015, total farm output more than doubled. Globalization brought more farmers into the national market for crops, flooding the market with soybeans and corn and cattle and milk, and with increased supply comes lower prices. Global food production has increased 30% over the last decade, according to John Newton, the chief economist of the American Farm Bureau. If that's a good thing for feeding the plant, it also produces what comes back to producers whose costs don't fall with prices. President Trump's trade war hasn't helped matters. After the United States slapped tariffs on Chinese goods, including steel and aluminum last year, China retaliated with 25% tariffs on agricultural imports from the U.S. China then turned to other countries such as Brazil to replace American soybeans and corn. This was a market that took years to develop, says Barb Kalbach, a fourth-generation corn and soybean farmer in Iowa, referring to China. The president's worked very hard to make our markets unstable. Her soybeans are harvested and sitting again in a grain elevator as she waits to see if China will buy despite the tariffs. Agricultural exports between January and August this year were down 5%, or $5.6 billion from the same period last year. The Trump administration has made $16 billion in aid available to farmers affected by the trade war. Though small farmers complain, the bulk of the money has been going to huge producers with large crop losses. Around 40% of the $88 billion in farm income exported this year is going to come in the form of federal aid and insurance, according to the American Farmer Bureau Federation. Farm income absent the assistance at $55 billion is down 14% since last year and half of what it was in 2013. Small farmers have found it especially hard to adapt to these changes, which they blame on the government policy and the lack of antitrust enforcement. The government is on the side of big farmers, they say, and is ambivalent about whether small farms can succeed. Get big or get out, Earl Butz, Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture, infamously told farmers in the 1970s. It's a sentiment that Sonny Perdue, the Agriculture Secretary under President Trump, echoed recently. In America, the big get bigger and the small go out, Perdue said at the World Dairy Expo in Wisconsin in October. The number of farms with more than 2,000 acres nearly doubled between 1987 and 2012, according to USDA data. The number of farms with 200 to 999 acres fell over that time period by 44%. Many small American farmers are routinely selling crops for less than it costs to produce them. It's very intimidating. You work hard every day, and every day it seems like you're just always struggling, says Rickman. Prices are so low that farmers like the Rickmans are trying to figure out other ways to come up with money to keep their farm going. But like many other rural areas around the country, the town of Freeman does not have a bustling economy. Both the Kmart and another department store, Shopko, closed in Waupaca County this year, costing dozens of workers their jobs. Mary Rickman will turn 80 in January, got a job delivering newspapers. The family also launched a GoFundMe account, but after Mary crashed her car on a foggy night, her husband and sons convinced her to abandon her paper route. In the past, the family has sold calves to raise extra money, but John recently bought 2 calves to the stock market and got $20 for one and $30 for the other. 2 years ago, those calves would have bought in $300 to $400 each. If someone would have told me, this is when it gets 20 years ago, what it was going to be like now, I think I would have called him a liar, Rickman says. Heavy rain and unseasonable snow this year has also hurt many Western farmers this year. farmers. This year has been one of the most significant weather event years, says John Newton, chief economist of the American Farm Bureau Federation. Portions of Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota experienced record flooding this year, with the upper Mississippi River receiving 200% more rain and snow than normal. Unusual rain and snow prevented farmers from planting on 19 million acres this year, the most since USDA began measuring in 2007. Last year, by contrast, weather prevented planting on just 2 million acres. Mike Rossman, a clinical psychologist farmer from Iowa who works with farmers in distress, says that this spring he's got 7 calls per week from farmers who were having mental health problems because of their farm finances. One farmer called Ronan to say he was considering suicide. Floods destroyed the corn he already harvested and stored in the grain elevator, but neither crop insurance nor flood insurance will even cover it. Since he already harvested the crop, when that farm is lost, it's a huge amount of loss of self, says Scott. Because you tie yourself to the work that you're doing, especially being a farmer, I can imagine. While a senior policy specialist at the Rural Advancement Foundation, which runs a hotline for farmers in danger of losing their farms, John Hansen, who runs an assistance home hotline in Nebraska, says this year has gotten calls at midnight from desperate farmers, including one sitting in his kitchen with a loaded shotgun and the lights out. It's just really sad to see, It's very bleak for us. Many farmers I know are in the same boat, said Brenda Corrin, a small dairy farmer in Pennsylvania, who says she knows of 9 suicides related to low milk prices over the last 2 years. It would take a miracle to sustain us for 5 years. Farm Aid operates a 1-800 hotline for farmers facing crisis, and calls to that hotline were up 109% last year from the year before, says Alicia Harvey, director of Farm Aid's Advocacy and Farm Services. The newest farm bill sets aside $50 million over 5 years for behavioral health support for distressed farmers. Rural America has been shrinking for decades, and the Great Recession accelerated contraction as rural manufacturing jobs disappeared and people moved to cities and suburbs seeking work. That is indeed where the jobs are. Between 2008 and 2017, metropolitan areas that include central cities of at least 50,000 people accounted for 99% of all job and population growth, according to the data crunched by Dave Swenson, an economist at Iowa State University. In the Midwest, 81% of rural counties saw population declines between 2008 and 2017, and in the Northwest, 85% of rural counties shrank over that time period. Cowbatch, the Iowa corn and soybean farmer, says that on the square mile of land where she lives, 5 different families used to grow corn, beans, hay, cattle, and pigs. Over the past 15 years, the other 4 farmers have given up and moved away. As farmers sold to bigger operations, the local businesses that were dependent on small farmers went belly up too. The place where the Cowbatch buy chemicals is now 75 miles away. Her county's lone pharmacy closed early this year. There is no longer a place where she can get farm equipment repaired. All the 1,000 farmers that have left the land, all the business have gone with them, she says. So at the institutions that make a community, around 4,400 schools and rural districts closed between 2011 and 2015. The most recent year for which there is a data available, according to the National Center for Education Statistics, added roughly 4,000 schools over the same time period. In Wisconsin's dairy country alone, the Antigo School District in north central Wisconsin closed 3 elementary schools this year, and 44 schools have closed since 2018. I used to have a lot of neighbors. Now I have almost no neighbors, says George Naylor, an Iowa corn and soybean farmer who's trying to transition to organic farming to stay afloat. Corcoran is worried about the future for her rural Pennsylvania community as more farmers give up. 2 neighbor farm auctions are scheduled soon. The dairy refrigerator supply business where she buys equipment is on the verge of collapse. Young people see economic despair all around them, get out as quickly as they can. I see this as a wholesale removal or extermination of our rural class, she said. There's nothing on the rise to turn around these rural areas. Americans are increasingly concentrated in a few metropolitan areas. By 2040, 70% of Americans will live in 15 states. The regions surrounding American family farms may become the country's next ghost towns. We have to think about what we really want rural America to look like, says Jim Goodman, president of the National Family Farm Coalition. Do we want it to abandon small towns and farmers who can make a living, and a lot of really big farms are polluting the groundwater? Large farms, which have more animal waste to deal with because their size, have been found to pollute groundwater and air. We got to get back to small farming, but unfortunately, it's just all this is showing me is a crisis needs a crash or something like this to get things back in whack and back to some level of understanding. And when you destroy small farmers, and this is when you get a lot of your food in different aspects, also employment for these people. It just shows you the decline of where America is going to. And I don't say that lightly. I'm just saying that this is the time to think about things differently. Most family farmers seem to argue on what led to their plight. Government policy. In the years of the New Deal, they say the United States set a price floor for farmers, essentially ensuring they receive the minimum wage for the crops they produce. But the government began rolling back the policy in the 1970s, and now the global market largely determines the price they get for their crops. Big farms can make do with lower prices for crops by increasing their scale. A few cents per gallon of cow's milk adds up if you have thousands of cows. See the lady here. Small farmers warn that a country without local farmers can create problems in food supply chain. One company is providing all the milk or cheese. This is a very good point here. What happens when the plant gets contaminated or storm isolates it from the rest of the country? It's an incredible fragile supply chain, and when it fails completely, says Morrow of the Rural Advancement Foundation. Family farmers say concentrating farmland among a few big companies is akin to feudalism and un-American. Well said. It also diverts whatever profits might come from farming to faraway investors, aggravating the economic and geographic divisions that feed the nation's political divide. There's a strong reason to be deeply concerned when instead of having 10 mid-sized family farms producing income whose owners spend it in town, you replace it with a large farm owned by a set of investors whose profits go running off to New York and Chicago, said Peter Carson, a professor of law emeritus at the University of Wisconsin Law School. Well said. Farmers say the best solution is government policy that cracks down on consolidation of grocery stores and food processing facilities that buy food from farmers. Existing antitrust law will allow the government to prevent big mergers that mean farmers have fewer places to sell their crops and that supplies are more expensive. But those laws go largely unenforced, says Carson. Earlier this year, a Wisconsin congressman introduced legislation to put a moratorium on large food and grocery mergers. Farmers are advocating for better antitrust enforcement across the country. In October, cattle ranchers held a rally to stop the stealing to urge Congress to protect family farmers from monopoly power. And in Vermont, dairy farmers have filed a lawsuit alleging that a conglomerate of milk buyers conspired to set low prices on milk. Wow. One category of small farmers thriving in the current marketplace is organic farms, who can charge a premium for their crops, and who can sell them locally. There were more than 14,000 certified organic farmers in 2016, up 58% from 2011. But switching to organic is expensive, and farmers like the Rickmans, who are already deep in debt, not an option. They haven't gotten a cent of aid from the government, Rickman says. Statistics goes to the farmers that most farm land and animals. They're not holding their breath that anything will change. I sometimes feel, says Mary Rickman, like they were trying to wipe us off the map. Wow. Powerful article. It's really lengthy. I'm going to put aside the link in the description, but I had to go through it because when you see stuff like this, especially for American farmers or form a small business, and without that notion for that to go on and just having large corporations take over what they have, like they stated, cuts in the supply chain or something like that, it can definitely drastically have a huge effect on the population. And move into this new neo-feudalism, and it's just, we really need to be aware of this. This video has been any value to you, please subscribe, leave some comments, click the bell for your next video. Until my next video, I'm out.